Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you. Our first reading from the prophet Ezekiel might be one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible. It's this scene where God is speaking through Ezekiel, and God sees his people, and he sees them as being a lifeless people. All of the life has been ebbed out of them, and now they're as dry, lifeless bones. But God, looking at his people, says this: I will put my spirit into you. I will put my spirit into you. And that word spirit is the Hebrew word ruach, which means spirit, life, or breath. God, seeing this lifeless people, says, I'm going to breathe new life into you. You see, it was on the very first page of the Bible that we first heard this word ruach. And it's when God takes the dust and the clay of the ground and he breathes his life into it, and we became living beings. And from that scene in Genesis and today from Ezekiel, we learn this about ourselves: that we have life because of God. God is the source of our life. And we become lifeless. We become like dry bones when we are cut off from the source of our life. And so just thinking about your own life just for a moment, as you just think about the week that has gone by, the week that is to come, maybe this season, this month, this year, whatever it might be, is there anywhere in your life that in a particular way you feel the need for God to breathe his spirit into you? Is there anywhere, any situation in your career, your marriage, your family, a relationship, an illness, a struggle, a worry, an anxiety, any sort of trial or tribulation that you feel like you stand in need of God breathing new life into you? I just want you to hold that question and any answer that you might have right off the bat. When I was growing up, every morning started the same exact way. It started by turning on ESPN and watching SportsCenter. All of the highlights from the games from the day previous. I don't know how many times, especially in the summer, I would watch episode after episode of SportsCenter. How many times I needed to see the top 10 plays on repeat. They're always the same, but I needed to see them 10 times a day just to be reminded of it. We like sports highlights. Just yesterday morning at the gym, there was an unusually large amount of guys huddled around the TV as we all took in the March Madness highlights from the day before. We enjoy watching sports highlights, but I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but sports highlights, they don't really matter because it already happened. What took place the night before, well, it's a new day. We got to move forward. We can't just completely live in repeat of the night before. We like the highlights, but there's nothing that we can do. No prayer that we could throw up to God to let the outcome of this or that game be any different anymore. The game is over, and all we have now is a highlight reel to remember it by. I wonder, everybody, if when we hear the words of the gospel, the stories of the gospel, when we read the gospel and these amazing, incredible things that Jesus has done, if at times they don't just kind of become for us like a highlight reel of the life and times of Jesus. Think about the last 3 stories we've heard this season of Lent from the Gospel of John. They've been long stories. I think you've all noticed that with our Gospels these past few weeks. But we had the woman at the well. Then last week we had the man born blind, and today we have Lazarus being raised to life. The woman at the well is brought from a place of shame to a place of freedom. The man born blind was brought from a place of darkness to a place of light. And today, Lazarus is brought from a place of death to a place of new life. And it would be easy for us in hearing these stories and just thinking, oh, that happened 2,000 years ago, to just applaud Jesus and say, hey, that's a pretty amazing thing that he did. And there's power in that. Remembering the things that Jesus has done. But is that all the Gospels are for us? Is it just a collection of stories of things that took place 2,000 years ago? A giant highlight reel of the life of Jesus? Or are the stories that we encounter in the gospel meant to spur on some change in our life right here and right now? Is the story of the woman at the well meant to be for us an invitation to go from any shame we're living in to a place of freedom as friends of Christ? Is the man born blind meant to be for us to recognize our own blind spots and our own darkness that we live in, and be for us an invitation to live in new light that Christ brings? And is Lazarus' story not just an incredible account of how a man was dead and then began to live again, but rather an invitation for each one of us, where perhaps we find ourselves lifeless, able to be restored and have new life breathed into us here and now. You know, in considering the story of Lazarus, I want you to imagine you are Lazarus here for a moment. And the burial cloth across your eyes has just been lifted. And you see for that first moment in the new life you have been given, the face of Jesus. What are you thinking in that moment? What was Lazarus thinking in that moment? Was it, doggone it, Jesus, now I'm the only guy who has to die twice? Probably not. It's probably, here you are, Jesus, now as the very source of my life. And then to a second thought, can any part of my new life be the same as it once was? Wouldn't instead every part of Lazarus' life now have to be seen in relation to this moment? That he stood lifeless, but now is full of new life. Would he not now see every part of the life that he has been given as somehow connected to this moment of encounter with the God who is the source of his life? And is this not the invitation for you and for me? That in each of those places where we feel like we are a bit lifeless, that the Lord wants to encounter us in that place to give us the gift of new life. Now, how does that happen? How can the stories of the Gospels go from being a highlight reel to being real? Well, I think we see three moves, 3 steps in the story of the raising of Lazarus that we can all do in our own life. And the first one is this: Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now that I know anything you ask of God, God will give you. What's Martha doing there? She's crying out in prayer to God. We see Martha here on the roller coaster that is the life of faith. Going from almost complaining to Jesus, Jesus, you could have done something about this and you didn't, to making an act of trust, but Jesus, I know you still can do something here. And each one of us knows what that is like. To have cried out in prayer to God for something that we need. And it made me feel as though that prayer was left unheard. And yet, even in that, to see an invitation for a greater act of faith. But God, I know you can still do something here in my life. If I want to encounter Jesus, I have to cry out to him. And sometimes in that crying out to him, he does make us wait. Did you hear how, it's so interesting how John put it, that after Jesus heard that his friend Lazarus was ill, he said because he loved him, he stayed where he was for 2 days. Because Jesus loved Lazarus, he didn't immediately answer his prayer. I don't know if we always feel loved when God makes us wait in our prayers being answered. But what if in that waiting, God is actually drawing a deeper faith out of us? I've said it a million times before, and I'll say it a million times more. When it comes to our prayer, if God only knew that which you told him, how much of your life would he know about? You see, everything we don't share to God in a crying out of prayer is like us disinviting Jesus into any area of our life. But when we cry out in need to him, this is our way of saying, okay, this, Lord, is the place that I want to encounter you. So the first step is to cry out. The second step comes in the form of the shortest verse in all of the Gospels. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. I don't know if we much appreciate how deeply significant this line is for us. That when Jesus shows up on the scene, he does not come first and foremost as the fixer. He comes firstly as the friend. A lot of times we want Jesus just to fix our problems. But actually, his desire is to be with us in them. You see, if God just immediately did everything that we asked him, we would soon treat him like an ATM and not as a friend. We would go to God, get what we need, and then move on. But actually, it's the being with us part that we are able to experience the depths of God's love for us. And so in our own lives, we've received bad news. Receiving the Lord into that space is simply praying, Jesus, did you hear the news? You've had a very complicated, difficult, maybe knockout, drag-out argument with your spouse. Jesus, did you hear that? You have a place of deep worry and anxiety in your life. Can I sense right here Jesus not just being the fixer of my problems, but the friend who is standing shoulder to shoulder with me in them? It was the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle who said, without friends, who could live? Without friends, who could live? God desires a personal relationship with us, not just a transactional one. And so the fact that Jesus comes and at first he weeps, the one who has power to do something about the whole situation, he shows us that his first impulse is to simply be with us. And then lastly, to yield to the power of Jesus in our life. Jesus commands them to roll away the stone. He commands them to unbind and untie Lazarus. And they're reasonable people. Jesus, it's been 4 days. It's going to smell it's going to smell terrible in there. And Jesus says, no, roll away the stone. And they yield to his power. They do what he says. You know, when we look at our own situations in life, what has Jesus already told us to do that perhaps being reasonable people we think might just be too simple to work? Forgive as I have forgiven you. Love as I have loved you, namely sacrificially. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on this earth. Give and do not count the cost. No greater love has a man than to lay down his life for his friends. What are the words, the things, the commands that Jesus has already given to us in the scriptures? And what happens when we begin to listen to them? Even at first we think maybe they won't work. You see, if we want the life of Jesus, we have to be willing to live the way of Jesus. And it's in yielding to his power and his authority in our life that we begin to experience that life in our own. And so, friends, in whatever that place of your life is where you feel like you are in need of the breath of God breathing new life into you, I invite you to cry out to God there, to receive him in that place, and to yield and to respond to his power and authority in that place. I'll end with this. A parishioner a couple of weeks ago in an email to me shared a quote from a novelist, Annie Dillard. And Annie Dillard, the novelist, said this. It was a quote that at first didn't really strike me, and then I thought about it. She said this: "The way we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives." And at first, that didn't really strike a chord with me, but then I thought about it. What are all of the ways each and every day that the Lord is seeking to be the source of my life? If the Lord wants to be the source of my life, then he wants to be the source of my days, those small scenarios, those small places, and the big ones. Friends, as we round out this season of Lent, I encourage you to relate everything, to share everything to God, to receive him, and to respond to him so that you might experience the newness of life that he desires for you.